Late summer 1942, over Guadalcanal, American pilots received an order that went against everything they'd ever been taught. Do not dogfight the Zero. For nearly 2 years, Japan's Mitsubishi A6M Zero had ruled the Pacific skies. From Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea, the Zero outclimbed, outturned, and outfought anything America could send up. Reports from China spoke of kill ratios as high as 12-1. Allied flyers described the Zero as untouchable, a ghost that appeared anywhere, struck fast, and vanished before they could react. With a range of nearly 2,000 miles, it seemed to defy logic. The Zero set the rules of aerial combat until the day it met the Hellcat. The Zero was born from one of the most ambitious design orders ever issued by Japan's Imperial Navy: build a carrier fighter with unmatched range, speed, and firepower. Chief designer Jiro Horikoshi accepted the impossible brief and achieved it through ruthless simplicity. Every ounce of unnecessary weight was cut. Armor plating removed, self-sealing fuel tanks gone. What remained was the lightest, most agile carrier fighter the world had ever seen. Powered by a 950 horsepower engine, the early Model 21 could reach 330 miles per hour and soar above 30,000 feet. Armed with twin 20mm cannons, it shredded slower, heavier opponents like the American F4F Wildcat. Pilots like Saburo Sakai and Hiroyoshi Nishizawa turned the Zero into legend, names whispered with respect and fear. The message was clear: Japan's skies belonged to Japan. But the same design choices that made the Zero lethal also made it fragile. One bullet through a fuel tank could turn the fighter into a fireball. No armor meant no second chances. The brilliance of its design hid the seeds of its downfall. That revelation began far from the tropics, on a cold, lonely island in the Aleutians. June 4th, 1942, the same day as the Battle of Midway. Japanese pilot Tadayoshi Koga's Zero was hit over Dutch Harbor. Trying to land on Akutan Island, he struck soft marshland. The plane flipped, killing him instantly, but the aircraft remained almost perfectly intact. Weeks later, an American patrol spotted the wreck. Engineers recovered it, cleaned it up, and shipped it to California. The Akutan Zero would become one of the most valuable intelligence finds of the war. At North Island, U.S. Navy test pilots flew it and finally learned its secrets. Yes, it was agile, but at high speeds, its weaknesses became deadly. Above 220 knots, the Zero's controls froze. It couldn't dive safely or roll fast enough to evade pursuit. And without armor or fuel protection, even minor hits meant disaster. The U.S. Navy rewrote its doctrine overnight. Don't turn with the Zero. Don't chase it slow. Dive, strike, and climb away. These lessons would shape the design of America's next naval fighter, one built specifically to kill the Zero. At Grumman Aircraft on Long Island, engineers got to work. Their mission was simple: build the Zero's worst nightmare. The result was the F6F Hellcat, a fighter that didn't try to match Japan's agility. It crushed it with speed, power, and durability. Where the Zero had a 950 horsepower engine, the Hellcat carried a 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney double Wasp. Where the Zero had no armor, the Hellcat wrapped its pilot in steel. And where the Zero's fuel tanks exploded, the Hellcat sealed and survived. Armed with 650 caliber machine guns, it could rip a Zero apart in a single burst. It wasn't graceful, but it was unstoppable. One engineer called it the Wildcat's big brother. In truth, it was an entirely new beast. The first Hellcats reached carriers in late 1943, and Japanese pilots were about to learn that the rules of air combat had changed. The first encounters between Hellcats and Zeros in late 1943 revealed just how decisive American design choices would become. Japanese pilots, trained to dominate through agility and precision, found themselves struggling to adapt. Saburo Sakai, a veteran ace, encountered a Hellcat and realized something unprecedented. The aircraft could absorb massive amounts of damage without faltering. He later described firing hundreds of rounds into a Grumman fighter only to see it continue flying, something he had never experienced before. Combat reports from the Solomon Islands and later the Central Pacific show consistent patterns. Hellcats would climb above the enemy, dive with speed unmatched by the Zero, deliver a short, devastating burst of 50 caliber fire, and then pull up, leaving the lighter Japanese fighter helpless to follow. This tactic, known as boom and zoom, maximized the Hellcat's speed and structural strength while exploiting the Zero's vulnerabilities: fragile airframe, no armor, and control limitations above 220 knots. Japanese pilots could still outturn the Hellcat at low speeds, but American training emphasized avoiding dogfights entirely. Pilots were taught to control energy and altitude at all times, never giving the Zero the opportunity to leverage its agility. The psychological impact was immediate. Pilots who had once felt invincible now faced machines that could shrug off cannon fire and dive away at velocities they could not match. Morale dropped as losses mounted, and even the most skilled Japanese aces struggled to maintain the dominance that had seemed unassailable just a year prior. The decisive test came during carrier battles across the Pacific, particularly in the Philippine Sea. American pilots, flying in well-coordinated groups and supported by intelligence, systematically engaged Japanese forces. The Hellcat's advantages were not just mechanical, they were integrated into doctrine, training, and coordination. The resulting kill ratios were staggering. The Hellcat claimed the vast majority of enemy aircraft, proving that industrial capacity, pilot training, and intelligent design could decisively shift the balance of power. By 1944, the Zero's weaknesses were impossible to ignore. Japan faced a critical problem. Their industrial base and pilot training system could not keep pace with attrition. Skilled veteran pilots had been lost, replaced by hastily trained recruits with minimal flight hours. The Zero remained highly maneuverable, but without experienced pilots, its advantages were increasingly irrelevant. The aircraft that had once ruled the Pacific skies now became vulnerable, and the Hellcat exploited every flaw. Japan attempted to modernize its fighters. Later models of the Zero, such as the A6M5, added some armor and upgraded engines, but improvements were incremental. Advanced designs like the Kawanishi N1K Shidenkai could have shifted the balance, but they arrived too late and in insufficient numbers. Japanese factories simply could not produce them quickly enough, and fuel shortages compounded the problem. Meanwhile, the United States continued to churn out Hellcats at an astonishing pace, over 12,000 in just 2 years, ensuring replacements for every loss. The integration of intelligence, training, and logistics further magnified the Hellcat's effectiveness. American commanders relied on code-breaking, radar coordination, and carrier-based communications to direct fighters with near-perfect precision. Pilots were trained in energy tactics and situational awareness, exploiting every design weakness of the Zero. In contrast, Japanese pilots often fought without coordinated guidance, increasingly unable to apply their aircraft's limited advantages. The losses in the Philippine Sea, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, illustrate the magnitude of this shift. Over 2 days, Japan lost more than 600 aircraft, while American losses totaled just 123. The battle did not just destroy planes, it shattered Japan's ability to project air power. From this point onward, the balance of the Pacific Air War decisively favored the United States. By late 1944, the Zero's role had changed. Once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, it was relegated to kamikaze missions, its light frame and long range now repurposed for human-guided attacks. The aircraft that had once dominated the skies was now a weapon of desperation, a stark symbol of a nation unable to replace the losses it had sustained. The Hellcat, in contrast, continued to provide air superiority, enabling the US advance toward the Japanese home islands and supporting the broader strategic push across the Pacific. The rivalry between the Zero and the Hellcat highlights the consequences of strategic rigidity versus adaptability. The Zero represented a near-perfect execution of pre-war Japanese doctrine, lightweight, agile and long-ranged, optimized for offensive combat at close range. Its design achieved extraordinary early success, establishing Japanese air superiority across the Pacific. Yet that very brilliance carried an inherent limitation. It left no room for significant upgrades. Adding armor or a more powerful engine would have required a complete redesign, something Japan could not afford amid dwindling resources. The Hellcat exemplified a different approach. American designers focused on resilience, firepower, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. Guided by intelligence gathered from the Akutan Zero, Grumman engineers produced an aircraft that could absorb punishment, maintain control at high speeds, and deliver overwhelming firepower. By the time it reached combat, it was not just a capable fighter, it was a platform that allowed American pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. For the pilots themselves, the shift was profound. Japanese veterans like Saburo Sakai were forced to confront the reality that skill and maneuverability alone could no longer guarantee survival. American pilots, meanwhile, benefited from machines that could survive hits, a training system that emphasized tactics over luck, and the assurance of industrial support that replaced losses almost immediately. The final lesson extends beyond individual aircraft. The clash between Zero and Hellcat became a testament to industrial capacity, doctrinal flexibility, and the integration of intelligence and technology. Japan built an aircraft for a war it hoped to fight. The United States built an aircraft for the war that actually existed. That distinction dictated not only aerial combat outcomes, but the broader trajectory of the Pacific campaign. In the skies above the Pacific, the Zero's early dominance faded in the face of superior speed, firepower, and tactical adaptation. The Hellcat's triumph reshaped the air war, cleared the path for American advances, and forced a reluctant nation into desperation. The Zero remains a symbol of ingenuity constrained by doctrine and resources, while the Hellcat stands as a reminder that adaptability, resilience, and strategic insight often determine victory in ways far beyond the capabilities of any single aircraft.